Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Berry from the Miami University Alumni Association. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Miami Women Presents I Want More, 5 Keys to Unlocking Your Fullest Potential. If this is your first time hearing about Miami Women, it's the Miami Initiative for Advancing, Mentoring, and Investing in Women. Working with our campus partners, we provide networking and professional development opportunities for all Miamians, virtually and in person. We also help fund specialty projects that Miami faculty, staff, and students seek to help for through our Giving Circle. Our presenter today connected with the Miami Women recently by attending a networking breakfast in Atlanta. Our presenter, Margaret Weniger, a class of 2007, was a varsity swimmer, 3-time MAC champion, and strength and conditioning All-American at Miami. After graduating from Miami, Margaret started her career in tech sales and would spend over a decade building, scaling, and turning around high-growth tech sales organizations. During her time in sales leadership, Margaret learned what really fueled her success wasn't the best sales tactics, tools, or even hard work. Instead, it was fueled by caring about and investing in the people on her team. She discovered her true passion in life was helping people see their unique superpowers and how to leverage those to unlock their fullest potential, not just in their career, but in life. Today, Margaret works with individuals and organizations to build solid foundations that serve as a springboard and accelerant to achieving their definition of great success. Before I hand it over to Margaret, a couple of housekeeping notes. We'll try to address questions that were collected at registration throughout the presentation today, and live viewers can ask questions during the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question at the bottom under your video. Margaret has shared a worksheet for today's webinar that you can access by clicking on the resource button below your video. You'll also have the opportunity to share responses and reactions during the webinar in the same manner by using the Ask a Question button below. And at this time, I will turn it over to Margaret.
Thank you, Emily. Oh my goodness. I'm so honored and excited to be here. This is such a treat to get to be with my fellow Miamians and to talk about a topic that is just so near and dear to my heart. And I am really excited to spend this time together. And also, like Emily said, please, I really encourage you to share your questions, share your thoughts. And I will be sharing contact information at the end as well. So if you're a processor and a question comes to you later, you have ways to get a hold of me. I encourage you, please reach out. I want to engage. This is such an important topic, and today is really about action. So with that, we'll start getting right into it. So we're going to talk about the 5 keys to living and your fullest potential. Emily gave me such a beautiful intro. I'm going to go ahead and skip past this slide, but I'm a speaker, I'm a coach, and I'm a consultant. And like she said, this is one of the common threads throughout my career. And it's an area of passion and purpose now, is really unlocking this, because I like to think about what could the world look like if each of us were operating as the fullest version of ourselves at that moment in time. As we go through this presentation, I always like to give a little bit of an objective. We're going to cover 5 habits. And what I want to encourage you to think about is there are probably some of these habits we're going to go through that you're doing already very well and you're very strong in. And that's great, because it's going to validate what is so wonderful about you. And there may be an area where you are drawn to that you see as an opportunity to maybe enhance or begin doing that you're not currently. And so as we're going through the 5 habits, I really want you to pay attention to what's a habit that is really speaking to you. And each habit, I'm going to walk through action items that you can take after today's session and set into motion immediately. And so I just want you to be on the lookout for what those are. We'll be sharing the slides from today in the resources page for this presentation. So if you want to be able to refer back to it and then make a decision, you'll be able to do that after the presentation as well. So with that all set up, we'll get going. Potential is an interesting word, and I thought, let's all get on the same page about how we're defining what we mean by potential. And so using Cambridge Dictionary's definition, potential is someone's ability to develop, achieve, or succeed. Now, when we think about potential, it's really important that we think about it as a state of action, not a state of being. So the The good or maybe the bad news, depending on your personality, is that there is no finish line. There is no moment where you say, aha, I have reached my fullest potential. Just doesn't work that way. It's an ongoing state. And you can think about it kind of like this staircase over here, that throughout your life, you are likely experiencing similar experiences over the course of your lifetime. But the goal is that as you continue learning and growing, as you're striving to live in your fullest potential, it's as though you're ascending this staircase and that you're seeing those same experiences, but you're seeing them from a different vantage point and are able to perhaps navigate them with more advanced skills or with a better or higher perspective. All right. So when we think about this topic today, the beauty in it is that our fullest potential is a state of action. How we define it and what it means to be living in our fullest potential changes and evolves with us over time and what's most important to us. Now, for today's topic, this was gleaned from research that's been done over the last 2 years in 74 interviews. These were women from 7 different countries, and there were 28% women of color, and 70% of the women interviewed were at an executive level or higher. And so what I'm sharing today is these are the core habits that continue to surface again and again in the research that was allowing women to not just be successful in their careers, but truly living aligned lives. And those 5 habits are these: strong career crew, proficient networkers, understanding what matters, listening to your intuition, and creating directional career goals. So each one of these we're going to break down throughout this session, and then each one will come with its own action item. So let's jump in. Number 1 is a career crew. This is one that's really fun in that there are specific people that continue to show up in this career crew. And so there were 3 main members, if you will. There were mentors, sponsors, and coaches. And each one of these are distinct in the roles that they hold. Mentors are people that typically they don't have to be within an organization that you're a part of. They can be outside of it. You can have multiple at any given time, and they can kind of go from active to inactive states. They also tend to have knowledge or expertise in an area where you're focusing. And so mentors can be a really valuable resource to leverage and to help you as you're looking to grow and perhaps connect to new opportunities or new experiences. Sponsors are different in that these are very specifically going to be people within your organization. They are oftentimes people who are in senior leadership and usually have access to rooms that you don't have access to. And as your sponsor, they can speak on your behalf, even though you're not present. What's important about sponsors is that they have to be clear, 1, that they are your sponsor, and 2, that they know what is important to you, so that if they're going to advocate for you, they're clear on what's important to advocate for. And then the third thing is the coach. Now, this is one that I would say virtually every interview, and when I say that, there was one exception. Coaches were engaged during stages of high growth and high transition. And these are paid professionals. So unlike a mentor, these are individuals that are trained in the art of coaching. They are working with you to partner on mutually agreed upon goals and establishing strategies and plans to help you attain those goals. And so each one of these types of members plays an important role, and they serve different functions. And then depending on where you're at, you're not always leveraging them, but being aware that they're part of your growth journey. Now, I wanted to tell you about Barunda Prince because she's one of the women that was interviewed, and Barunda is the COO of RICE here in Atlanta. And RICE stands for the Russell Institute and Center for Entrepreneurship. And she is someone who throughout her career was oftentimes the first or the only. You can see here she was the only Black female engineer at MIT. She was the first Black female engineer at P&G's Beauty and Care division. She was the first Black female consultant at Bain & Co. And she has been able to be incredibly successful in her career because she discovered early on the importance of leveraging, she calls them advocates, but essentially sponsors. And some of the advice that she had shared through her experience was, first off, to keep an open mind. There were times where, as a Black woman, she didn't really necessarily know that a white man would show interest in her. And so by being open to people who showed that interest, then she was able to build relationships. And then she was clear on what it was that she wanted. And she was able to tell them what she wanted to do in the next couple of years and ask for their not only guidance on how to get there, but then also advocacy in rooms to create those opportunities that would allow her to continue on the path that she was setting out to pursue. And so Barunda is a great example of somebody who continued to grow in her career because she could articulate what she wanted, but also enlisted advocates who saw her capability and were there championing for her when she wasn't in the room. So as you listen to that, if that is speaking to you, then your action item is to evaluate your career crew. I want you to take a look at the people around you right now and think about, do you have a sponsor? And do they know that they're your sponsor? Do you have a mentor in an area that you're currently developing right now? And then the third thing is, especially if you're in that state of growth or transition, are you have you considered or even entertained working with a coach? Is that's something that you currently are using, or perhaps is that a resource that you could have to help you as you're growing? Okay, so that's action item number 1, habit number 1. Number 2, networkers. So I can't see your faces, but typically when I'm in person with people, I tend to get some bristling, some shoulder rugs, some nose scrunches, some grunts, because networking seems to carry similar stigmas to when I used to tell people that I was in sales. And the idea here is that as I was doing these interviews, oftentimes the individuals they didn't always identify as proficient networkers, but what they were ultimately describing was networking. And so, first off, let's get aligned on what networking is and what it is not, because this is really important as we think about how we leverage this to live in our fullest potential. So, the first is, networking really was about relationships. It was about connection to other people, longer term. What it wasn't was superficial. We're not talking about going to that, local event and trying to get as many business cards as possible, but really learning nothing of substance about the person. There's a time and place for this, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about relationships. The second thing is, it was talking with others who oftentimes shared a common interest, some sort of common ground. And so what it's not was, it wasn't measured by quantity, right? This was more about the quality of the relationships and the interaction and the overlap of interests, as opposed to how many people you have in your network, which feeds into the next one, which is, networking is reciprocal. It's a give and a get. And there are times and seasons where you're asking for more, and there are times where you're able to give more. But what it's not is one way. And so oftentimes, if we focus on quantity, then we can also have empty relationships where we may be uncomfortable with making an ask, and or we don't really appreciate when one is made of us. And so they're reciprocal. Networking is reciprocal in nature. And then the last thing is, our network is an incredibly powerful resource. As we do the things above of these relationships and connecting on common interests and reciprocity, what we find is that then it becomes an incredible resource that can open up opportunities when we need it. So Sabina Pons is another woman who was interviewed, and Sabina was the COO for a rapidly growing tech startup. And she was overseeing specifically customer success and realizing that the company's pace was moving at a rate that she needed to bring in outside help to train up and up level her customer success org. And so she found a company and she partnered with them to do the training. And she realized as she was partnering with them that the founder of the company was really speaking to her. She felt this really strong connection. And at the end of the engagement, she asked the founder if she would be a mentor. And the founder said yes. And over the next 2 years, they had a beautiful mentor mentee relationship and would stay in touch and connect frequently. And after a couple years of this really intensive growth, Sabina realized that as much as she had enjoyed the ride, it was no longer aligning with what was important to her, and she was ready to make a change. And so she began reaching out to her network. And one of the women that she reached out to in her network was her mentor and found this founder. And as they were talking about it, and Sabina was sharing what she was looking for, it just so happened the founder was also looking to expand her business and looking to bring on a new partner. And through the conversation, Sabina ended up moving over and now working and serving as a consultant for customer success at B2B SaaS companies. And so it's a beautiful story of someone who not only did she make the ask in the first place for a mentor, but then she also later reached out and invited her network to help her as she was looking to make the next move in her career and life. So, if this is one that you're realizing, perhaps I could do more here for networking, maybe networking is not so bad if it's done in this way, then I would really encourage you. I like to think of this as opportunistic networking. So, after today's event, looking on whether it's LinkedIn for individuals that you feel a strong connection to, maybe if you work for an organization, there's a leader or somebody you see speak that you just feel drawn towards, or perhaps you're going to an event or have gone to an event where you met someone or connected with somebody or saw someone on stage that really spoke to you. I encourage you, lean into that connection that you're feeling, reach out to them and send them a note and tell them the impact that they had on you, even if it's, I just felt drawn to you, and then invite them to meet for 30 minutes. Doesn't have to be anything structured, but just deepen the relationship to understand more about them and explore. No pressure, just exploration. And I can promise you, this is something that most people are glad to do. It is the utmost compliment when you tell someone that they spoke to you. And oftentimes that's enough for them to say yes to being open to connecting. Okay, so that's number 2 is proficient networking, and this is your action item if that's the one you want to focus on. Next step is knowing what matters. This one is really foundational, and that this is how you're going to navigate big life changes, really big life changes. And there's 2 key pillars here in knowing what matters. There are these individual values, and then there's the dimensions of our life. And so as we think about individual values, oftentimes we're going to have somewhere between 5 to 7 of these. They are our rock. They are our core. They are that stable force that doesn't change. Beliefs can be updated as we gather new information, and they should. But our core values are that's what sticks with us throughout our life. And so when we think about these, oftentimes if you haven't done your core values, usually a great way to recognize them is when they're getting stepped on. And so typically when things trigger us, we have strong emotions about something, usually strong negative emotions. That's typically an indicator that there's values at play. And so that's kind of a great inkling of where we might have values that are being compromised or being stepped on, and something important to us is being put in at risk. The second piece of this is the dimensions of our life. And so often what can happen is when we talk about ourselves as ambitious professionals, we look at ourselves in just one dimension of our life rather than looking at ourselves holistically as these multidimensional humans that we are. And so throughout, again, seasons of life, chapters of life, what is most important to us can change and should change. And so having clarity on which dimension of our life is most important is really critical. Now, when you look at dimensions, you will see all variations. I love the 6 here, but you see there's some that do 8 and even 10. Relational, I want to call out. Relational is very inclusive. This includes romantic relationships, friendships, as well as familial relationships. And so looking at these dimensions and understanding what is most important to us. Now, Dr. Jen Rittenhouse is a incredible story in that she was an HR executive and had worked at top brands like PepsiCo. And there was a time where the market conditions were difficult, much like what we see today. And her position was downsized and eliminated. And she was kind of forced into this phase of reflection. And what she was starting to realize is that she was planning for going after her next career, right? Because at the time she was 40. And so she was, to her, she was about halfway into her career. And so she was looking for what was next. And as she did this, she started realizing her daughters were becoming teenagers and needing her more now than when they did as little kids. She had been traveling a lot for work. And when she looked at their family calendar, her husband had been traveling a lot for work. And in fact, in 52 weeks in a calendar year, they had only been at home in person together 7 weeks out of the entire year. And what she realized is that relationships, specifically familiar relationships, was really the priority for her. And up until this point, she had not been honoring that. And so she was in the process of interviewing for new jobs, and she got presented with an incredible opportunity to work at a Fortune 500 company in an executive level role. It all sounded amazing, great benefits, great title, great salary, everything that the world says we would want. The only catch was it was 80% travel. Now she would be on a corporate jet, but 80% travel. And when she looked at what was most important to her at this moment in time, which was her family and being present, and this potential career opportunity, she realized very quickly the truth of what she had to do. And she turned down the offer. And the reason she had conviction in being able to do that was because she knew what mattered to her. And she would go on to build her own consulting company and pursue her doctorate, and now works with small and medium-sized companies consulting on HR best practices. But none of that would have happened if she hadn't been clear on what was important to her at that moment in time in her life. And so when you think about the action item for this is a two-parter. Okay, so there's if this is where you want to focus on, there's two different areas of this. The first is solidifying your values, and a couple of things you can do here to do this. Number one is I mentioned that what triggers us is oftentimes an indicator of where our values are. In fact, if you're familiar with Dr. Susan David, she's a psychologist who talks a lot about emotional agility. And so she says using our negative emotions as data points informs where our values are. So over the next couple of weeks, I just want you to track strong reactions and jot them down. What's happening, who was involved, any sort of details. Just put them on a piece of paper for a couple of weeks. And after a couple of weeks, you're going to look back at them and do a quick Google search for a list of values. Okay, that way you have something to pull from. And I want you to start assigning values to those events. What are things that were potentially getting stepped on? And once you have your list, quantity over quality at that point, then you're going to start grouping those based off of similarity. So the values that you see across all those different experiences, where are they similar? And then eventually you're going to start creating kind of the summary value for the ones underneath and write your own definitions. And as you do this, think of it as a draft. Values are something that you can continue iterating. So get the first draft done, try them on for size, and then just continue to refine them as you gather more data points about yourself and what's really important. The second part of this is, are you aligned? So this is the worksheet that will be in the resources tab, and it's really simple and it'll take less than 2 minutes. It'll have all the dimensions and it's going to ask you what is most important to you, and you're going to circle them based off of priority. And then in the next category, it's going to talk about satisfaction. So I want you to think about this as, where are you spending your time and are you finding joy in it? And so what you're going to look for is, are there any significant disconnects or misalignment? So is there a dimension that is really important to you, but you have low satisfaction? Or is there a dimension that isn't important to you, but is getting a lot of your time and attention? And that's going to be your indicator of where you can focus to start taking actions of, how can I either begin shifting more attention into an area that's important to me? Or perhaps where am I giving a lot of attention that I want to pull back some of that and put it in another dimension that's more important? Okay, number 4 is listening to your intuition. Now, this one's really interesting because intuition is that little voice that talks to us. And sometimes it can be really easy to ignore it because sometimes when that voice speaks, we don't know what it's going to tell us to do. And so we want to ignore it. But through this research, what was really powerful is that by tuning into this intuition, this is really what allowed women to stay aligned, to stay on their path, if you will, and not get distracted by what the outside world was telling them they should do. So when we think about our intuition, this is our ability to understand something immediately without needing for conscious reasoning. In fact, conscious reasoning is oftentimes what gets us in trouble because we start to rationalize away our intuition, or we start to question it, or we start to second guess it. So when we talk about it, it's this immediate understanding. Now, what else it is? I said it's easy to rationalize away. It's very subtle if we are not practiced at giving it the microphone, and it can be easy to miss. It gets stronger as you gain more experience. So think about it like a muscle, right? It's something that as you give it life, as you test it, it grows in strength and you can grow in your trust with it. And it's also your authenticity guide. Now, Regina Wallace Jones is an interesting story in that she was in Silicon Valley and extremely ambitious. She was maniacally focused on accelerating up the ladder as fast as possible. And she worked in the tech world, and within her 20s, she had ascended to VP level at a tech company. And again, by all signs, she had achieved what she wanted and what the world usually tells us is considered, quote, success. The problem was she wanted a family and she wanted kids. And she had been trying and they were unsuccessful. And she started going to the doctor, and there was nothing wrong with her. There was nothing they could diagnose to say why she was having trouble conceiving. And they started exploring other alternative routes for fertility. But there was a voice that was telling her it wasn't anything besides the stress of her job. That was what was keeping her from having a child. And to be clear, Regina had practiced listening to this intuition. So you can imagine this intuition voice was making a very big ask, because what it was essentially saying is step back from this career you just spent the last 8 years building aggressively if you want what you say you want. And so Regina, again, did seemingly the unthinkable. She stepped away from her career altogether. She wasn't pregnant, but she knew that if she continued on the path she was on, it might be very difficult for her to conceive. And so she resigned, did not take another job, and 3 months later, she found out she was pregnant. And so this is a beautiful story of somebody who had to make a very big intuitive leap, but because she had trusted that voice, she was able to trust herself and know at that time what was aligned with what was important to her and authentically what she needed to do. And so this action item is deceptively simple in that next time your intuition speaks, my ask, if this is the one you want to do, is to just listen to it. And this is something that, again, it sounds really simple, but it's important that when you have an intuitive thought, I really want you to just play with it. I want you to indulge it. I want you to take a moment and just explore what it's saying to you, not to dismiss it, not to rationalize it away, but just engage it. And again, playing with it and engaging that intuition, that doesn't mean you have to take any action, right? Oftentimes, even these intuitive thoughts that come to us, it could be months before we take outward action. So remember that next time it speaks, in order to listen, there's no action needed other than just being open to what it's trying to tell you. And last is creating directional career goals. And now I know I know we got some questions in the registrations about exploring potential after 55. So what I want to call out and what I'm kind of guessing is that, that may be kind of at the, maybe looking at focusing in other areas of our life. Maybe you are work optional at 55. Wouldn't that be amazing? And so, these are directional goals. They don't have to be career goals. Directional goals works the same as directional career goals. And so when we think about these, there's really kind of a three-step to them. And the reason directional is so important is that when we know where we're headed, we can set out on a path. But because we aren't so locked into exactly what it has to be, this gives us room and space to be fluid. So again, as we think about what do we want, right? There's that directional goal, like what do I want? And setting that for ourselves. And then identifying a next step, our best next step. And as you take steps, what ends up happening is you start to gather information, you start to learn things, and that's going to inform your next step, and then your next step, and the direction of your goal may get clearer. You may refine what the goal is, but allowing yourself space and room to how you achieve that goal is what's most important. So I want to give you a really specific example here because sometimes when I talk about this, it feels very almost up in the clouds a little bit. So let's talk about this in a very specific example, which is this is Eileen Lee. And Eileen is the founder of a co working space for women called the Lola. And impressively, Eileen's co working space managed to survive the pandemic. They opened the year before in 2019, and she was able to successfully keep a co working space open during the global pandemic. So that should tell you something about Eileen. Now, for her, what was really interesting is that she had launched a successful startup and had recently exited and relocated to Atlanta. And her directional goal is that she knew she wanted to start something. She knew she wanted to do it with a co founder, and she knew that she wanted to have strong conviction. That was her directional goal. It was those were the criteria. That's what she wanted. And so then her next step, her action, is that she started consulting with mentors for advice. And then those mentors would introduce her to other people. And she had a lot of coffee conversations, and she would share what she was looking for. And as she had these conversations, she started gaining more and more clarity, which led to step 3, which was through those conversations, what she learned that she cared about is that she wanted to focus on building a community. She, through those conversations, learned that she wanted to build community with women. And also through those conversations, she ended up finding her co founder. And that is how the Lola came to be. And so you can see here, she was very directional to start. She gathered information, she took steps, and each step she took, she gathered information, and eventually it became what she's doing today. And so if you're looking at perhaps exploring directional goals, is that's the thing that you want to walk out of here focusing on, then all I want you to do is I want you to ask yourself, what do you want? And again, using Eileen as an example, it doesn't have to be overly specific. It just needs to be directional enough to get you started. And then I want you to take that and then focus on what is it that you can do immediately as a next step to start getting more information or learning more about how you might get more detail around it. So, to recap, we covered a lot of ground in this last 30 minutes. When we talk about living your fullest potential, these are really the 5 core habits to doing that. Having a strong career crew, you're going to evaluate your career crew. That's your action item. If you're looking at investing in networking, then you're going to build a new connection in the coming weeks. If you want to focus on knowing what matters to you, if that's an area that you're realizing perhaps there's some opportunity there, then taking time to create or solidify your values and understanding, are you in alignment? Next is listening to your intuition when it speaks to you, giving it life, playing with it, being open without pressure to take any sort of action. And last is creating directional career goals. And so thinking about what do you want, gather information, and refine. This has been such an honor to be able to share this with you. And hopefully, you feel armed and empowered to go and take steps to living your fullest potential. Like I said at the beginning, I am deeply passionate about this. We have so many ways we can connect. There's all the social handles here for you. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. I have a podcast called the Rising Tide Podcast where I share these incredible interviews. I have a website. I actually need to update that. It's margaretweniger.com. And then I have my emails here. So please, if you think of more things or you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me in any one of these forms. I would love to connect with you. And I think with that, thank you. And I'll hand it back over to Emily for some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Margaret. That gives us a lot to think about. We do have several questions that have come in. Starting with, how do you recommend people find a coach, and what are the important characteristics to look for when they're searching a coach?
Ooh, what a big question. So, all right. So, a couple of things are, what are you looking for coaching on? There are so many different flavors of coaches out there. So, I think the first thing is, what type of coaching are you seeking? And so, starting with that. So, kind of looking in a general area. I have found a great way to do this is, again, tap your network to people that you respect, that have worked with a coach. That's a great way to just see if they've got somebody that they recommend, based off of what you're looking for. And then a lot of coaching is about chemistry. So I would really encourage you. Most coaches will do some sort of preliminary consult. They'll get on a 15-30 minute call with you to get to know you better. And I would definitely use that time to determine, do we have chemistry? Is there connection? Because this person's going to work really closely with you. So it's not just a matter of, do they coach in an area that's important to me, but also, is this a person that I feel a strong connection to? And if you don't, then I would keep looking. But if you want to accelerate finding someone, I would definitely recommend asking some trusted advisors in your network that work with coaches to see if they have anyone that they recommend. And I do think there is an element too to pay attention to, as far as like, kind of age is important. I think sometimes when you're thinking about coaching as well. So keep that into consideration too. Of just pay attention to what your intuition's telling you when you're engaging with them.
Great, thank you. Another question is there one habit that you find more important than the others?
It depends. It depends. So I think they are all equally important and they're all relevant. What I will say is, knowing what matters is the one that I would say is where people get the furthest away from themselves if they don't have that foundation in place. So it's kind of that proactive reflection to understand what's important to you. And what's interesting is, much like potential, knowing what matters to you, you need to do this on a recurring basis. So the dimension of life that's important to you, you may be in a season where the next couple of years you're very focused on your personal dimension, and then you realize that you're coming out of that and you want to focus somewhere else. So I would say that that's the one that you want to make sure that you're taking recurring time, you're scheduling recurring time to check in with yourself, probably at least once a year, to understand what's most important to you now. But I mean, you're asking me to play favorites, but I would say that's the one that, without it, you can get pulled, because again, a lot of times people who are drawn to this content, you're really ambitious, you're probably incredibly talented, and people want you to be part of whatever they're doing. And so you can easily get pulled into things. And that's sometimes, when we don't have that foundation, we wake up one day and we look in the mirror and we don't know why we're doing the things that we're doing, because we don't really like or enjoy it. So yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question.
So the next question is along a similar line. What habit do you find the hardest to start, and do you have any suggestions on how to push through?
Well, don't push through. I think that's the first one. I think maybe reframing it to how can I make this easy on myself? So that's one of the biggest things I'll say here is that when you feel that fight or resistance, that's a great sign that you might be operating outside of your zone, your strengths. And so it doesn't mean that you don't do it, but perhaps you explore another way to do it. So just using that phrasing of words, yes, I strongly encourage you not to push through. And then I would say, what I find, and I'm going to frame this specifically. Most of my conversations are women, but I believe that this is true with men, is that intuition tends to be the scariest one. It's the easiest to silence. Again, it's when that voice, that kind of discontent kicks in, where we feel that feeling that we know we're capable of more, or we kind of think there has to be more for us. That it can be a little bit scary because we don't know. Again, we don't know what the consequences of giving life to that voice will be. And so that's one where I would say with the intuition, start small, pick little things, and if you are not practiced at using it, because each time you use it and you have the opportunity to experience what happens as a result of using your intuition, then you gain confidence in it, because now you have data points that say, like, when I've trusted myself, here's what happened. So that's one where I would say progress. You don't want to bite off a major life decision on intuition if that's not something that you are practiced at listening to. So yes, that would be the one. That would be the one that I would say is like deceptive. It seems deceptively simple.
That's really interesting. And I feel like we could chat for another hour at least on that reframing and the idea behind that. I think that's really a fascinating concept.
Mm-hmm.
And then our last question, what books and or podcasts do you recommend?
Oh gosh. Oh man. Whoever put that in there, if you can narrow me in, I'll give you some of my favorites, but if there's something specifically you're looking for, let me drop that in the chats real quick, because I would love to, if I can be more specific, I will. So podcasts, let's see. I really enjoy so Adam Grant's podcast. I'm trying to remember what he calls it now. It was Rethinking, but I find he brings on really great guests. They a lot of times it's content centered around the workplace. So I would say if you're a working professional, that one's really interesting, because he's really talked about a lot of topics around burnout and languishing, and he did some great content around quiet quitting and things to consider. And so he usually brings in really great experts and thought leaders that I thoroughly enjoy. I'd be remiss if I didn't plug my own podcast, which is Rising Tide. And I love that one because you get to hear these incredible stories and draw inspiration from women who are doing things. And it really kind of reminds you that anything's possible at any stage of life. But again, it's about knowing who you are and what you want to be aligned to. Yeah, I'll have to think about for the podcast. And then books. So there's a couple ones that I do love. So I mentioned Dr. Susan David. She has a really phenomenal book called Emotional Agility. And this one is really great, especially if you're wanting to kind of get more in tuned with how you think about your emotions. And so I think what is really great with her is that, she really frames it up as like emotions are not really good or bad. It's more, they just inform us. They are indicators of what's important to us. And so that one's a really great one as far as like really kind of developing an EQ. Another one that I thoroughly enjoyed recently is called Range. And the reason I loved Range is the subtitle was how generalists thrive in a hyper specialized world. And so again, I'm guessing, you're probably, again, very multidimensional, multi-talented. And so what I really enjoyed about this book is it's really great at helping offer the value of somebody who is more of a generalist instead of this pressure to hyper focus. And so this importance of transferable skills, not becoming domain dependent, to see the value of what we've learned, and that, we can switch context, but still bring that expertise and information with us, even though we're changing perhaps where we're focusing. So I'd say those are two really great ones that are recent reads that I thoroughly enjoyed. But did they by any chance chat in to say if there was anything else?
No, but we did get a couple more questions if you have
Oh, okay.
here is one. How do we acknowledge and maybe even
Mm,
address the privilege required to be able to change course in a career?
mm.
Great question.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because one of the things I talk a lot about is career sabbaticals. And oftentimes people I get this question too with career sabbaticals because what I would say is this: there is privilege in doing it immediately. So one of the big things is when you think about if you're going to take an extended break from work or you're going to make a major career change, there is privilege in immediately doing it. But this is something that anyone can do. The difference is it may take a little more time. You may need to be a little bit more intentional. And so I have a great resource I'll share with you as far as I actually have kind of the steps of making a career change. And again, through these interviews and through this research, what I found is that there's really 5 steps that are taken so that you can, we'll call it, safely cross what I call the bridge of calculated risk. Like you're still going to have to take somewhat of a risk and make a leap, but there are things that you can do to set yourself up for success. And so I can share that as far as again, it's starting with just giving life to even being open that you might want to make the career change. And so I think that's step one, is just acknowledging that that's something that's got your interest. Step two is just, again, exploring. So either that's, if you're not sure what you want to do, you just know you don't want what you have, then that's probably doing some of that internal work of what's important to you, what are you passionate about, where are your strengths. Or it could be starting to explore different roles. And so starting to have some informational interviews, going to your network and asking questions and finding out, either where are skills like mine really valuable, or I'm looking to get into these types of roles. Who would you recommend I talk to? And then typically the fourth step is then going to be starting to do something on the side. So a lot of times people will start either doing something on the side part-time. They'll start getting involved in certain communities to start building relationships and networking there. And then the fifth step is ultimately like making the commitment. So I'll share that because I actually have an infographic that breaks that down. I also have a podcast episode that specifically talks about making a career change. But I really love that question because it is important to talk about. But I do think the big distinction here is the privilege comes in timing and how quickly you can move.
Sure, that makes sense.
So hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you. The next question is, even if I'm not looking to make a big change, I want to be able to support my colleagues who are considering a shift. Do you have
Mm,
advice for how we can be allies to folks who are trying to live their fullest potential?
oh, what a beautiful question. Yeah, I mean, I think, sharing uh, one, and I think encouraging them. So one thing that has been fascinating is in my research, 72% of professionals made a major career change before they turned 40. So I think one of the kindest things you can do is to normalize this desire. And that there is plenty of room to change careers and be extremely successful. And so I think that's first and foremost, is you can normalize this. This is a very normal thing, right? We are very dynamic. We grow and evolve, and it makes sense that our career would also grow and evolve. So I think that's a gift you can give them, is just communicating that to them, and then I think encouraging them, right? So it's meeting them where they're at. So if they come to you, don't feel the need to have answers, but more so just ask them questions. So do they know what they're interested in doing, or do they know kind of what skills they want to continue using? And then I think just kind of asking them questions from there. And the best thing you can do is like, what's a step they can take to learn more, or to gather more information. So encouraging them to take a step, to take a action, because getting started can be really daunting. Especially, we want to have all the information before we do anything. And so you have to get started to start gathering insights into what you're going to want. So I think there's the validate them that this is normal, and encouraging that, asking them some questions to understand, where they're at in this process, and then encouraging them to take a step, take an action so that they can learn some information.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then finally, our last question. What is your advice for balancing or integrating your personal goals with that of your
Mm.
organization?
Oh, okay. So I didn't plant this person, but this is like my favorite question. Nothing against the other questions. So when I was a leader, there was a book that I had been introduced to called The Dream Manager. And this book was very life changing in that the premise of it was told in fable format, but the premise was that as a manager, understanding the people on your team holistically and understanding their dreams was the most important thing into aligning what they did for work with those dreams. And so, what I found again and again as a leader is that when I would sit down with a new team member or when I'd come into a new organization, that one of the first things I would try to understand is what was this individual trying to achieve in their personal life? Because for any of them, whatever we're looking to do in our personal lives, that's what shapes our professional goals. And so once you can understand that, then you can look at how can I achieve that within the work that I'm doing at my company. So, I mean, that wasn't quite your question, but I would definitely say when you think about your personal goals and the context of the company is, how can you align what you're looking to achieve in your personal goals with what the work that you're doing. And so that, I mean, that could look a lot of different ways. I worked in sales. So it could be somebody was trying to buy a home. And so the goal that we were setting was, what do you need to hit from a performance perspective to earn the commission that's going to give you the money to put a down payment on a home, right? So that would be incentive to we would build their goals around that. It could be that you're looking to minimize time at work, and so perhaps you want to shift into a different role. You're passionate about the company, but you're not wanting it to be something that you have to be responding outside of core hours. So I think that's really great as far as encouraging you to let those personal goals shape how you think about the work that you want to do.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for your time today, Margaret. It was wonderful to
Yes.
speak with you again. And thank you all for participating in this Miami Women webinar.
Yes, thank you for having me.